Hello everybody, warm welcome to this S&OP MasterClass from Røgma. My name is Søren Hammer Petersen and I'll be your host for today's session. The purpose of these S&OP Masterclasses is to dive into hot and trending topics within supply chain planning, give you our perspective on these and hopefully give you some tips and tricks that you can use in your own supply chain plan. Today's session is part of another session we did not long ago on AI and supply planning, and today we are continuing on this topic. So when in the first podcast we look very much into what is AI and supply chain planning, today we are diving into two main questions. One, am I, my organization, my company ready to use AI in supply chain planning? And more importantly, where are the pitfalls when you start to include AI in your planning, and how would you mitigate them? But as the same as last, I'm not alone here in the studio. Again, I brought my good friend and colleague, Stefan Skovlund, which were also part of the first session. Welcome, Stefan.
Thank you.
So let's just get into it. You know, the audience here is supply chain professionals. They're thinking about AI. And one of the big questions they have at the moment is, I want to do this AI, but are we at all ready for this? What's your thought on this?
It's a good question. It's a big question. I think one of the difficult things about AI is that it is so many things. It can be language models, it can be machine learning models, it can be image models. So I guess because there are so many moving parts when we talk about AI, a good way of approaching AI readiness is actually to look at it from a framework perspective. So let me try and create a kind of an overview of the AI methods that you can consider applying in your company. So imagine that we have an x-axis. So at the left of the x-axis we have out of the box, and at the far right of the x-axis we have white glove solutions that are highly custom. And then on the y-axis, we have value. So we have low value in the bottom and high value on the top. Very simple framework. So if we start by just placing the different AI methods that could be relevant, we can start in the lower part of this matrix. And we can look at out of the box and relatively low value, but out of the box, quite simple to work with. Here we have chatbots. Chatbots that you can easily apply to a database and start querying your database based on these chatbots. We had a discussion about this in the last video, but the idea is that it's relatively simple. It's something that you can set up and it generates value, but it's not something where you need to hire a huge consultancy team to operate it. So that is one example. That is one way of framing it. If we move a bit to the right, you can say somewhere in the middle of this matrix, we could talk about a machine learning model. A machine learning model also comes like a language model out of the box, like a default model. But the thing here is that with machine learning, you need to tweak the parameters more and you need to train it on your data. So here you start thinking about what is the relevant data, how do we train it, who will train it, who will answer questions, and so on. So that is slightly more advanced than a chatbot you can just query. And at the far right, you then have the white gloves projects where you hire a big consultancy team and do an end-to-end workflow optimization. And this sounds very futuristic, but so let me just give you an example of that. You could actually deploy what is called an agent framework. This is a method where you use different AI agents that are working in a sequence. So one of those agents could be a specialist in forecasting. Another one could be trained as a specialist in capacity planning. And a third one could be specialized in assembling all this information and creating a report. So different kind of agents that do different things, but they all work in a sequence, in a flow. And this is actually not very far off. There are a lot of startups that works in this area. One of them is Crew AI. Another one, which is very famous, Microsoft, has made an AutoGen framework for this. So this is possible. But of course, it takes a lot more training, a lot more customization, because you need to align this with the rules, the logics, all these things that are very specific for the company, and the language models know nothing about these things. They need to be trained for that, and that takes a lot of time and effort. So that's a way of framing it, the landscape. Are you going for out of box? Are you going for the middle? Or are you going for the far right white gloves projects?
Yeah. So actually a good way of assessing if I'm ready is to start by assessing also how many resources do I actually have that I can invest in this.
Exactly.
Because that will have a huge effect on which kind of solution that you could apply in your...
Exactly, and that is how the framework should be used, because the framework gives you an idea of the resources that is required, and of course also a little bit about the value that you can expect from this. And as I also mentioned in the previous session we had, a lot of companies we are talking with are very much into getting their feet wet. Are very much into how can we learn to use it and just do like a small scope project, but just so we get the feeling of what it can do for us. So here, the chatbot and the machine learning could be good candidates, because here you can take something that has been proven and that can generate a high level of value, but without doing a huge consultancy projects.
Okay.
So that could be a good place of starting for most companies in the supply chain field.
Yeah, I think still on this topic, one of the questions I get a lot anyway when I have these discussions is around data.
Yes.
In a sense. So we talk about, am I ready for AI? You have to talk about data.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
That is the next question, actually. Data, once you have kind of mapped the different relevant AI approaches, the next question is, of course, data. Do we have data required for this? And I think there is a kind of a misconception when we talk about AI, a slight misconception, that is, the more the merrier. That is not always the case. When we talk about AI, it's, of course, in most cases, quite data hungry, but it's also very data quality hungry. And if you are experiencing a lot of issues with your master data, for example,
which they all do,
which sometimes is the case, you know that you are heading for troubles here. Yeah. But it's not the same as saying that you have issues with all the master data. That is also a common, I would say, misconception, that actually some of your master data is perfect, but not just everything. But you need to have a very good idea that of the data you have at hand that you actually can use for this. And a good way of thinking about it is at looking at what are the minimum requirements that you need for making this work. So an example of this is just if we go to a forecasting example. Of course, you need sales observations, and you need those on a daily level if we are framing it for machine learning. And out of this, the machine learning model will actually be able to generate, 5, 10 more variables just out of the date variable. It can be a week, it can be months, etc. And on top of this, just by adding, let's say, product group, you could suddenly have a model that is highly complex, but it's actually only based on 3 variables. So it's a misconception that you need tons of data. Actually, you can do with much less if it's good quality. So I would advise that you think closely about what is the minimum requirement of data needed for this specific project, and start there. And you can always, of course, build after that.
Could you actually have the thought that now we're on the master data that AI could assist you predict master data if you have poor quality, or could they help with this quality? So we have this in-between step.
Yes. I'm not sure if they could heal the master data. I was not go as far as saying that it would kind of be like a self-healing algorithm that you could let loose. But the idea is that AI has this critical reasoning component that a lot of statistics doesn't have. And until now, when we are fronting a problem with the data issues, we are typically using alerts. We are setting up some screens, and we are making some Boolean criteria, yes, no, or numerical criteria. This is rigid, and it works to a certain extent. What it doesn't catch is all the gray zone areas where we are almost at a threshold. We are almost approaching a criteria, but we're not there. But still, it is a concern, or a flag should be raised. For these areas, a model, an AI model, could be very efficient, but it would need training. It would need to see some of the use cases that we would label as gray zones. But I think this could be a valuable area because many people or many companies are dealing with problems with master data and using tremendous amount of resources for fixing it. Yes.
So what I hear you say is that yes, most company, if not all, are ready to at least get their feet wet using AI, because in the simple setup, it might not require that much in terms of resources and in terms of data. But of course, there are huge variations here that could be really, really big. So, but if you then are going to get your feet wet, and most of our listeners probably will at some point, of course, a very interesting point is what should you be very aware of here? Where are some of the pitfalls, and naming some of those pitfalls, how can we mitigate them?
Yes.
Could you elaborate a bit on your experience there?
Yes, I actually think it's a good question, Søren. I actually think that many companies are holding themselves back because of these pitfalls. A lot of these are known, but it's not discussed so much. How do we mitigate them? So let's start by some of the most common pitfalls. Of course, explainability is a key issue. If you are going to deploy a model that you are using for decision making that is far more advanced than what you've been using earlier, then you also need somebody who can explain the output if the storm comes. That is just a question of time. We've seen many storms for the past few years in the face of Corona, in the supply crisis. Now, if you are in such a situation and you deploy something very sophisticated, but no one really know the inner workings of that, chances are that it will not survive very long before you're going back to something you really understand. And I think that has been the deathbed of many advanced methods in the past. And it will be the same with AI. You need a level of explainability. So how do you get that? How do you mitigate that risk? There is two obvious routes for this. One is that you build the in-house competences for people with skills in this domain. That can be a quite steep cost if you are a small, medium-sized company. Another way is that you team up with a company that has this service, like managed services. We have been doing this managed services for a decade now. Not only AI, but mainly statistical services in data analysis and so on. But just to use that as an example, when Corona happened, a lot of our clients were hit very significantly because suddenly the sales were, falling with 80%, something like that, from one day to the other. No statistical model can react on that the right way. So here we needed to do a lot of tweaks and changes in the way the models were set up. That was not a skill that the companies had themselves in-house. And if we had not supported them in this area, the chances are that they would have been, going back to purely manual planning. And then all the efforts of building these models would have been wasted. So a very critical consideration is to team up with somebody who knows about this, or to invest in the skills in-houses. But this goes very much back to what you're choosing. If you choose a simple out-of-the-box chatbot for talking with your data, you will be fine. If you go with data that is AI that is slightly more advanced that you will be using for your decision making, it's absolutely crucial that you have somebody who knows how this is running.
So the advice here to mitigate is that if you don't have the managed service part as Perito IBP does, then you need to take it in steps that make sure that the explainability is there the whole way. So not going for the big bang, but take it in strides that you can actually make sure that you can handle. I think that's good advice.
Yes. I think another very important pitfall, and something that is perhaps not so discussed, is that AI is very sensitive to data shift. I've just talked about Corona, which is a bit of a data shift, but it can also it can also be more subtle and more difficult to see. But the shift still impact these models a lot. So, for example, when ChatGPT got launched, not so long after the launch, a lot of people started to experience that the quality of ChatGPT actually got worse. And there's a concept of laziness. So, for example, if you get ChatGPT to make a summary of something you find interesting, I don't know, in the beginning, these summaries were quite elaborate, quite detailed, but over time, there was a tendency that these summaries got shorter and shorter and shorter and more general. And this has something to do with the amount of data that you ingest in these data, in these AI models, and that actually harms the performance. So it's not like, and this is back to the concept of self-healing, because this is something, a buzzword that you will hear a lot with AI, which is completely wrong. There is no AI model so far that is completely auto self-healing. It doesn't exist. If that was the case, OpenAI would only have one employee. So the whole concept of AI is that, yes, you need a lot of data from many of the models, but yes, you also need somebody who can validate the data, who can clean up the data, and who can make sure that the model doesn't drift in any certain areas that you don't want. You want to have it to stay on a neutral course. So that is important. The maintenance aspect is really important. It's not self-healing.
Ooh, a lot of sales guys are going to be hurting after that comment, because there's a lot of PowerPoints out there saying that you should just flip the switch. But I hear you say that, there still needs to be hands-on to some extent.
It's back to psychology. It's basically what it is. The best story always wins. I would be far more liked if I go into a room and talk with a company and say, it's self-healing. It just works all the time. You just push play and you don't really... It's lights out planning, basically, but that's not the case. And I think that attitude and saying things like that actually hurts this business, because it's a fantastic technology, but you just have to acknowledge that it's not effortless. It's going to take a lot of effort, and it's also going to create some new tasks that you're not doing today, but you will have to take on. So yes, it can automate many things, but yes, it will also create new tasks.
So back to the pitfalls. You mentioned the AI models going in the wrong direction. How do you stop them from learning the wrong things or drifting?
Yeah, so that's a very good question. In Reuma, we have set up a standard approach for managing this. One of the things that we're tracking a lot is the bias. So, for example, if we see that a model is more and more going in a direction of overestimation or underestimation, we are looking into what is causing that. And typically it's because there is an outlier or an anomaly in the data that we need to clean out that hasn't been cleaned out. That can be an explanation. But it can also be that there has been a sudden shift and the whole, you can say, the whole assumption about the data is something that needs to be questioned. So having a robust governance around this AI is the key for avoiding these things from happening. But that is something you need to set up on top of the AI deployment.
Yeah. And I guess also when now you talk about governance, and governance sometimes leads to people. I guess there's a pitfall around that as well. We have a supply chain professional community who has been working with supply chain planning for many years, and maybe have some very fixed way of working with this. AI will come in and change this a lot, I guess.
Yes. It will require new skills for sure. I mean, there are many things. If you take the whole workflow, for example, of working with forecasting, there are many things here that AI can help automate. But there are also many areas where you would need to question and where you will need to validate those decisions.
Yeah.
And these, you can say, new skills in upgrading the workforce is something that needs to be, assessed together with having this new AI model implemented.
But I guess also you also need to have a positive culture around it.
Yes.
I guess because I can imagine in my head two kinds of AI projects. One proving that AI is amazing and will help us, and one proving that AI will do all the wrong things, so we should do what we have always done.
Yeah, I think one of the... It's not difficult to sell the concept of AI in a boardroom because there are so many positive aspects of automation. But as you getting closer to the people who are going to use it on a daily basis, it's quite threatening in many ways that you here have something that maybe can do what you've been doing for many years, perhaps in some ways better. So it's also about looking at it from a more holistic perspective and not selling as either or, but seeing how it can augment the workforce. I don't think that you can reason and say, this is dangerous, so I should not use it. That's not going to work that way. It's going to be, yes, this is new. Yes, this can do many things I used to be in the future, but combining what I know with the AI will make me much better. And this is the way to look at it the right way, I think. And that is the way also I think many companies are starting to communicate it, because it has so much potential this way.
Yeah, maybe also, I think that's a very good point, making a positive for the individual in their planning, that this will help them. And maybe also linking it, I guess, to every other area where AI comes into other parts of our lives, improving things. Yeah. So making a real positive story. Yeah.
But let me say, Søren, there is one thing that I really want to also flag, and that is a pitfall. I would say don't go for perfection. Go for building a robust model instead. So with that, I mean that when you look at AI, it's very easy to get into the details and all the things that you could use, because this has explanatory power for what we're trying to achieve. I can give you an example. Some years ago, I was helping a food chain, and that it was a bakery chain, and that chain needed some kind of forecasting to help them better predict the sales of cakes and so on. And of course, the weather element was a key part in this. The more it rains, the worse it is for the baker. So the idea was that we had some very clear ideas about what was driving the sales in those bakery stores, and eventually we started to build the models. We included the temperature, the wind and the rain and so on. And on the first day of using this, we were of course looking at the weather forecast quite intensively. No rain, but it finally got to a rainy day. And the thing is that this model failed completely. And the reason for that failure was that, yes, the weather forecast is telling you that it's going to rain, but no, it's not going to rain exactly on your doorstep. So that is an example of something where, yes, it has an explanatory power, but it is not operational. And that is an aspect that I often see many companies are kind of thinking about in the wrong way. They are thinking about all the elements that can explain and can predict, but in reality, they cannot use it. Yeah. If you take a food manufacturer who has a 2-week lead time, manufacturing lead time, and so on, being very focused on the weather, maybe it could be better to focus on other things, because you can simply not react. Of course, seasonality is another thing, but whether or not it's going to be a beautiful summer day in 3 days has very little value in reality. Yeah. So you really need to think hard about the data that you build your AI around, and always try to go for robust and simplicity to start with. You can always build out from there. Yeah. But keep it robust.
Yeah, I think that's excellent advice, and I can see time is running out now. So start simple and make it robust. I think that's good, and I can already see the contours of our next masterclass here going into practice. How would we actually set this up down in the engine room of this? This could be very interesting to dive into more. But thanks for all your good advice here. I hope that also you listeners out there got some good tips and tricks, and at least know what to look for now when starting this exciting AI journey. So thank you for tuning in. And as always, if you are interested to know more about some of the topics we talked here, or supply chain planning in general, or our supply chain planning solution, Pareto IBP, feel free to reach us out to Roima. We're ready to talk to you, and hope to listen from you. Hope you tune in next time as well. See you soon.